Why was the room colder than the Carolina summer outside? That was the first thought that struck Staff Sergeant Vance as she stepped into Conference Room B at Fort. The sun had been burning through the windows of the hallway, pressing its heat against the glass, but here, the air felt unnatural, icy, heavy, as though the walls themselves were waiting. She froze for a fraction of a second, her instincts screaming danger. Years in combat had trained her to recognize atmospheres before words were spoken. This felt like the seconds before a sniper's shot cracked open silence, or just before an IED lit up the earth beneath her boots. She adjusted her grip on the strap of her custom sniper rifle slung across her back. The weapon wasn't just steel and polymer, it was her shadow, her companion, her proof. For 3 tours across Iraq and Afghanistan, that rifle had sung its deadly tune in her hands. It had been her voice in battles where women were expected to stay quiet. It was the reason she was still alive, and the reason men in her unit had lived to see their families again. And now here, inside this sterile room, they wanted it gone. She could feel it in the way their eyes tracked the weapon before they even met her face. 5 men waited in a semicircle, massive, broad-shouldered grins that didn't reach their eyes. The kind of grins men wear when they already believe they've won. And behind them, Colonel Richard, his reputation preceding him like a storm cloud. His face was all rigid lines, a mask of politeness stretched thin over something sharper. "Sergeant Vance," said, gesturing toward the empty chair at the center of the room. His voice was velvet dipped in oil. "Please sit. We need to discuss your future with this unit." Remain standing. Her pulse had slowed into that strange calm she knew from combat when the world sharpened into details. The one with the linebacker's build kept cracking his knuckles, loud as gunfire in the cold air. Bell leaned slightly to his left, favoring an old injury. Eyes never stopped moving, sharp, predatory, an MMA fighter who hadn't yet left the cage in his mind. Crouched a little lower than the rest, wrestler's balance always in his legs. And Dawson, different. Still coiled, like he'd already calculated her. His height 5'4" made her look small against them, but she didn't shift her posture. She let silence hang. The men wanted to see fear. She offered them stone. "With respect, sir," she said evenly, "I prefer to stand. What exactly are we discussing?" Smile thinned. He circled her slowly like a wolf scenting prey, his hands folded behind his back, his metals glinting beneath the fluorescence. "Some of my senior staff," he said, "believe your record may not reflect reality." The words hit harder than she expected, not because she doubted herself, never, but because of the audacity. She thought of Lieutenant Anderson bleeding out in Kandahar until her 600-yard shot had ended the firefight. She thought of Corporal Michaels, screaming as she dragged him from a kill zone with rounds tearing the dirt around her. Every commendation on her chest had been earned in fear, fire, and blood. And yet here it was, reduced to a suggestion, politics, not merit. "My record speaks for itself," replied. "Records," interrupted, his tone sharpening, "can be misleading. What matters is current capability, real-world effectiveness." He gestured casually toward the 5 men. Their chairs scraped as they shifted, bodies suddenly more present, more threatening. It was then understood. This wasn't evaluation. This was theater, a spectacle designed for her humiliation. Her grandfather's words echoed in her memory. "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." "What exactly are you proposing, sir?" she asked, though her voice carried the weight of knowing. "A simple demonstration," said smoothly. "Hand-to-hand combat effectiveness. You against these 5 soldiers. A controlled sparring match, nothing elaborate." Cracked his knuckles again, grinning wider. "We'll go easy on you, Sergeant," he said, his voice low and mocking. "Wouldn't want to hurt anyone." His blood simmered, but her face betrayed nothing. She studied them, every stance, every breath, every angle of weight distribution. Her training, her father's words, her grandfather's precision, all whispering through her muscles. Size isn't strength. Technique is strength. "There is one condition," added, his voice dripping satisfaction. "You will surrender all gear. sidearm, tactical equipment, and his eyes locked on the rifle at her back. "Your sniper rifle." Her heart clenched, not fear, something deeper. That rifle wasn't just metal, it was memory, a part of her as much as bone and sinew. To set it down felt like betrayal. But the colonel wasn't offering a choice. His tone was velvet again, but beneath it steel. "Unless you prefer reassignment, logistics, administration, humiliation, or erasure, those were the options." Slowly unslung her rifle. The weapon clanked against the wooden table, the sound like a gauntlet thrown into history. Her sidearm followed, her tactical gear, each piece stripped away until she stood alone with nothing but her body and her will. Yet as she laid them down, something else rose inside her. Not fear, not doubt, but the cold fire she had carried through 3 deployments, the one that kept her alive when odds screamed otherwise. She lifted her chin, her voice quiet, steady, dangerous. She said, "I hope you're ready for this." Outside the door, footsteps shuffled. Whispers. Soldiers finding excuses to pass by, curiosity drawing them near. Word was spreading. By the time this began, she wouldn't just be fighting 5 men. She would be fighting 5 men in front of dozens of eyes, eyes that would carry the story further than could control. She moved to the cleared space at the center of the room. Her stance wasn't military regulation. It was older, balanced, fluid. Her grandfather's stance, passed through decades across oceans and wars. It wasn't about looking strong. It was about being inevitable. Colonel lifted his phone, angling the camera with the pride of a man already savoring victory. His voice carried like a judge declaring sentence. "The parameters are simple. 90 seconds, 5 opponents, begin when ready." Almost smiled. 90 seconds. He had no idea he'd already given her more time than she needed. Stepped forward, cracking his knuckles one final time. His shadow fell over her. He was massive, 6'6", 280 pounds of muscle. His grin widened, loud enough for the onlookers at the door. "Don't worry, little lady. I'll try not to mess up that pretty face." Didn't blink, didn't flinch. Her eyes met his, calm, sharp, unshaken. The colonel pressed the timer. "Begin." Lunged, arms wide, the promise of a crushing bear hug, the kind that ended fights before they began. But in that split second, something impossible happened. Vance wasn't there anymore. She had stepped forward, not back, her body moving with precise timing, sliding into a space his bulk couldn't control. Her hand struck a precise point at his lower back, her foot swept his ankle, and suddenly the giant wasn't a threat. He was weight thrown off balance, gravity weaponized against itself. The sound of his body crashing into the conference table roared like a cannon. Wood splintered, papers scattered. His laptop skidded to the floor. Lay sprawled across broken timber, his face a mask of shock. He hadn't even processed falling. A gasp rippled through the doorway. Someone whispered, "What the hell?" 85 seconds remained. Hadn't broken stance. Her breathing was calm, her gaze already fixed on the next threat. "Any time," she said softly. "The clock is running." For a moment, silence. Then growled, stepping forward with the coiled speed of a trained fighter, Bell circling to flank her, the trap closing. But's eyes sharpened, and beneath her calm, her father's last words whispered again. "Watch the shadows. Not everyone wearing our flag stands for our values." She didn't yet know what those words meant. Not fully, but she would. And this was only the beginning. Why did time feel slower now? It wasn't adrenaline, not entirely. It was something older, sharper, the sniper's mind she had cultivated over years of holding her breath, waiting for the one perfect second when life and death balanced on a trigger pull. Inside that room, with 5 men circling her, Vance wasn't panicking. She was calculating. Came first. A fighter by trade, his movements lacked the clumsy arrogance of. He was measured, predatory. He didn't underestimate her, he wanted to break her. His fists cut the air with speed, each punch precise, controlled. At the same time, Bell moved to her flank, creating a pincer, their timing practiced, deadly. Most soldiers would have been cornered. Most would have reacted with defense. Didn't. She dropped low, her body folding like water's fist whistling inches above her head. He stumbled forward, momentarily off balance, his weight shifting just wrong. Rose inside his guard, a single palm strike landing against his solar plexus. There was no dramatic crash, no Hollywood violence. Just silence, his eyes wide, his lungs betraying him. His body forgot how to breathe. His hands clawed at the air as he staggered back, gasping like a drowning man. Belle thought he had his chance. He moved in from her blind side, faster than his bulk suggested, but felt him before she saw him, the vibration of his boots on the floor, the air shifting at her periphery. Her left leg swept back with perfect timing, her heel snapping against the side of his knee. Pain shot through him in a howl. His body collapsed, clutching his leg. 73 seconds remained. 2 down, 3 to go. The murmurs at the doorway grew louder. Soldiers pressed closer, eyes wide. A woman, a sniper, a soldier who'd been whispered about for weeks, was dismantling Fort's strongest men like they were sparring recruits. The narrative had wanted was slipping. He tightened his grip on the phone, his lips pressed tight. Didn't look at him. She couldn't afford to. The wrestler had been circling like a shark, patient, waiting for his moment. And then he found it. He launched into a double-leg takedown, textbook powerful. It was the kind of move that had crushed opponents across his wrestling career, flawless execution aimed at folding in half. But had been waiting. Instead of stepping back, she surged forward. Her hands caught his arm, pivoted, and with the perfect redirection of his own momentum, she used his drive against him. His body flipped through the air, a judo throw polished by years of muscle memory. He hit the wall with a sickening thud, sliding down into a dazed heap. 61 seconds. His heart didn't race. Her breathing stayed steady. But inside, a memory burned, her grandfather's hand guiding her own when she was 5 years old. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. And the harder they fall, the longer they stay down. She could almost hear his voice in this room, as if he were standing behind her, unseen but steady. That left Dawson. He hadn't moved much. He wasn't reckless like the others. He circled, calculating, eyes sharp. He had fought before. Real fights, not staged ones. He knew what he was seeing, and that made him more dangerous than any of the others. His strike came low, sudden, for her ankles. It was clever wrestling mixed with an attempt to take away her balance, the very thing she relied on. But balance wasn't just good. It was survival refined into instinct. She lifted her leg in the instant he committed, and he grabbed nothing but air. His momentum carried him forward, exposed. Her knee shot upward, colliding with his face. The sound cracked through the room like a bat striking meat. Dawson dropped instantly, unconscious before his body even hit the ground. 49 seconds. All 5 men were down. Stood untouched in the center of the room, her hair still pinned neatly in regulation, her uniform barely wrinkled. For a heartbeat, silence swallowed everything, the kind of silence that comes after an explosion when the world itself seems to pause. Then whispers, gasps, shocked voices. Soldiers pressed against the doorway like witnesses to a miracle or a crime. His eyes slid too. He hadn't moved. His phone still pointed at her, his expression frozen in disbelief. He looked like a man who had seen the impossible and refused to understand it. "Will that be all, sir?" asked, her voice level. "Or would you like me to continue the demonstration for the remaining time?" Something cracked in the doorway, a sound out of place, clapping. Lieutenant Sarah Montgomery stepped inside, phone raised, recording. Her face calm but her eyes fierce. "I think that will be sufficient," she said. "Especially since this demonstration has just been live-streamed to approximately," she glanced at her phone, 50,000 viewers, including several officials at the Pentagon. His face drained of color. His jaw opened, closed, no words forming. The control he had believed absolute was gone, ripped out from under him. Felt her chest tighten, not with fear, not with triumph, but with something heavier. Gratitude, maybe. or the weight of knowing she had just stepped into something far larger than a fight. Groan, dragging himself upright from the wreckage of the table, Bell sat slumped, rubbing his knee, had finally found his breath, though his face was pale with the memory of suffocation. Blinked, dazed against the wall. Dawson stirred, groaning, one hand pressed to his swelling nose. But all their eyes were on her, not with mockery anymore, with respect, reluctant, raw. Something had shifted. The crowd outside the door erupted in murmurs. The story was already spreading through the veins of the base, faster than could stop it. A female sniper, 5 men down, 83 seconds. Retrieved her gear piece by piece, the ritual precise. She buckled her sidearm, secured her kit, lifted her rifle with a reverence that only she understood. The familiar weight pressed into her shoulder, and she breathed easier. As she turned to leave, finally spoke, his voice low, venom beneath control. "We're not finished, Sergeant Vance. This changes nothing." Paused, met his gaze. "With respect, sir," she said, her tone steady as stone, "I believe it changes everything." She walked out into the hallway, the murmurs following her like smoke. Montgomery fell into step beside her, phone still in hand, a small grin breaking through her composure. "That was," she whispered, searching for words, "revolutionary." Didn't answer. Not yet. Because in the echo of the fight, in the silence after Dawson's collapse, she had heard something else. "Thomas Vance's daughter," Dawson had muttered, half-conscious. "We need to talk about what really happened in the desert." The words hadn't left her head since. Her father, his last warning, "Watch the shadows, not everyone wearing our flag stands for our values," kept her stride steady, but her chest felt heavier with each step. The fight was over. The humiliation had failed, but something darker had begun. That night, long after the base had settled, lay awake in her quarters, her rifle propped in the corner where she could see it, her father's photograph on the nightstand. She closed her eyes, and for a moment the fight replayed. Not the strikes, not the gasps of the crowd, but the silence in Dawson's eyes before he fell. The silence of a man carrying something unsaid. What had her father seen in that desert? What had been buried before she even wore the uniform? And why, even now, decades later, were men like so desperate to erase it? The fight had lasted 83 seconds. The consequences would last far longer. And somewhere in the shadows, the next battle was already waiting. Why couldn't she shake the sound of his voice? Frank Dawson, half-conscious on the floor, blood seeping from his broken nose, had looked at her as though he'd seen a ghost. His words were quiet, nearly lost in the noise of the room, but they carried a weight couldn't ignore. "Thomas Vance's daughter. We need to talk about what really happened in the desert." That night lay in her quarters, staring at the ceiling. The air conditioner hummed, masking the faint murmur of soldiers in the barracks beyond her walls. Sleep never came easy, not after deployments, not after firefights, and certainly not after dismantling 5 men in less than a minute. But tonight was different. It wasn't adrenaline keeping her awake. It was memory. Her father's face, thin and pale in the last months of his life, kept rising in her mind. She remembered the hospital room, the harsh smell of antiseptic, the morphine drip hissing its slow poison into his veins. His hand had been thin, the grip frail, but his eyes, God, his eyes had burned with something urgent. "They swept it all away, Em," he had whispered, the words trembling with both fever and fury. "Buried it in the sand. But sand doesn't keep secrets forever. Watch the shadows. Not everyone wearing our flag stands for our values." At the time she'd nodded, humoring what she thought was morphine delirium. But now, after Dawson's words, after his desperate attempt to humiliate her, it didn't feel like delirium anymore. It felt like prophecy. The next morning the base was buzzing. She could feel it in the stairs, the whispered voices in the chow hall. 5 men defeated, 83 seconds. A video already burning through phones like wildfire. Soldiers who had ignored her now turned their heads as she passed, some nodding with respect, others with suspicion. A few with open resentment. Change had a way of dividing people. Only Lieutenant Sarah Montgomery met her gaze directly, sliding into the seat across from her with a tray of eggs and coffee. Sarah didn't waste time. She never did. "You know the video's at 200,000 views already," she said. "Pentagon's PR team is scrambling. They're trying to spin it as a planned demonstration of modern combat training." She smirked. "But the comments section tells a different story." Stabbed at her eggs without answering. She didn't care about comments. She cared about Dawson's words. "He said something," she murmured. Sarah tilted her head. "What?" "About my father, about the desert," fork stilled in her hand. "He said we need to talk." Sarah frowned. "You trust him, the same guy who tried to take your legs out 30 seconds before." Lips pressed into a thin line. That was his job. This felt different. Sarah studied her carefully, then leaned closer. "You think it ties back to what your dad told you?" Nodded. Sarah sat back, letting out a low whistle. "This just keeps getting better, or worse." Before could reply, the cafeteria hushed. Colonel had entered, his presence like a cold wind sweeping the room. His gaze flicked over the soldiers, but when it landed on her, it lingered. For the briefest second, thought she saw fear there. Not physical fear, something deeper. Fear of unraveling, fear of exposure. The thought gave her no satisfaction. It only made her stomach knot. That evening, as the sun bled red over the Carolina pines, found herself standing at the edge of the parade ground. Dawson was waiting there alone, his face swollen, his eyes sharp despite the bruises. He didn't posture. He didn't sneer. He simply handed her a folded slip of paper. "Not here," he said quietly. "Too many eyes, too many ears. Old gas station. Route 87, tonight, 8 o'clock. Come alone." Opened her mouth to respond, but he was already walking away, his posture unreadable. Sarah appeared at her side seconds later, as if she'd been shadowing the entire exchange. Her voice was low, cautious. That sounded suspiciously like the start of a horror movie. "You're not going alone, are you?" Stared at the paper in her hand, the ink smudged but legible. Her father's last words echoed louder now. "Watch the shadows." "No," she said finally, "not alone." "Good," Sarah replied, relief flickering across her face. Then her expression hardened. "But if you're going, we need a plan. Dawson's smart. He knows exactly what he's doing." Didn't argue, she didn't need to, because she knew Sarah was right. At 7:55's Jeep rolled silently down Route 87, headlights off. She parked half a mile short of the station, tucking the vehicle into the shadows of an overgrown billboard. The rifle stayed behind. She couldn't risk carrying it off base without authorization, but she wasn't unarmed. The knife at her ankle, the tucked against her spine, gifts from her grandfather, both untraceable. "Just in case," he had told her when she enlisted. "The battlefield isn't always where they tell you it is." The gas station loomed in the twilight, a skeleton of concrete and rust, its green dinosaur logo faded and peeling. Vines crept up its walls, reclaiming what man had abandoned. But the tracks in the gravel told a different story, fresh, sharp, too recent to ignore. And a sliver of light leaked from behind plywood covering the windows. Someone was waiting. Circled twice, scanning every angle. No obvious ambush. No second vehicle, just silence, just him. The door groaned as she pushed it open, the smell of dust thick in the air. A lantern burned on the counter, casting shadows across empty shelves. Dawson sat behind it, bruised, swollen, but calm. Alone. "You came," he said simply. "You said you knew something about my father." His voice was steady, but her hand hovered close to her weapon. "That's not the kind of invitation I ignore." He gestured to a folding chair opposite him. "Sit. This might take a while." She remained standing. "Talk." Dawson studied her for a long moment, then nodded as though he'd expected nothing less. "It started in 1991, he said. "Desert Storm, a mission called Operation Clean Sweep." The name froze her. She had heard it before, once, in a hospital room, whispered by a dying man who clutched her hand with the last of his strength. They swept it all away. Em buried it in the sand. Her breath caught, but she forced her voice steady. My father was there. Dawson nodded. He was, so was I, so was. The lantern flickered, shadows shifting like ghosts around the empty store. And for the first time, felt the shape of the truth pressing toward her. What did they really find in that desert? The question pressed into his chest as she stood in the hollow gas station, dust clinging to her boots, the lantern's glow cutting sharp angles across Dawson's bruised face. His voice was steady, though she could see the weight of 30 years pressing into every word. Officially, he said, Operation Clean Sweep never happened. You won't find it in reports, records, or archives, but it was real, and your father, Thomas Vance, was at the center of it. Didn't move. Her hand rested on the back of the folding chair, but she didn't sit. She couldn't, not until she knew what he was about to say. Dawson exhaled slowly. It was January 1991. The air war had begun, but the ground campaign hadn't yet. Intelligence identified a bunker near the Kuwait border. We were told it contained chemical weapons. Our job, verify, neutralize, make sure never use them. He paused, his gaze lowering. But what we found wasn't chemical. His heart thudded once heavy. There were 16 women inside that bunker, Dawson continued. Iraqi uniforms, armed but not prisoners. They were soldiers, trained in something none of us had ever seen before. Close quarters combat techniques, efficient, brutal, precise. Designed for one purpose, smaller fighters neutralizing larger ones. He lifted his hand, mimicking the kind of strike had used on him the day before. The way you fought in that room, that's what we saw, techniques that shouldn't have existed there. Unless someone gave them the knowledge. His throat tightened. You're saying they were Americans? No, Dawson said quickly. I'm saying their training originated with us. CIA experiments in the 50s, abandoned programs. Somebody passed the manuals and people refined them. Those women, deadly, effective, and invisible because no one thought they mattered, until we walked in. The lantern's flame wavered, pulse climbed. My father. Your father wanted to bring it back, Dawson cut in. His voice dropped, the words heavy. He argued we should learn from them, integrate the techniques into our own training. He said it could save lives, that combat should never be about muscle alone. Dawson's jaw tightened. But in his mentor, generals saw it differently. They saw a threat. If those techniques became public, women in combat wouldn't just be possible, they'd be inevitable, so they covered it up. Classified the women as enemy combatants, sent them to detention, destroyed the documents, scrubbed the manuals clean. Operation Clean Sweep. Closed her eyes for a moment. Her father's voice echoed. Sand doesn't keep secrets forever. He fought them, she asked. Dawson nodded slowly. He threatened to go outside the chain of command, said if the army buried it, he wouldn't. 3 days later, he was transferred to Oklahoma. His career, gone, that was, and me. The last word landed with guilt. Dawson rubbed his bruised nose, unable to meet her eyes. I followed orders. I told myself it was bigger than me, that I couldn't change anything, but your father, he was different. He carried the weight anyway. He memorized as much as he could before they shut him out, passed it on to your grandfather. His eyes finally lifted to hers. That's how you know it. That's why you dismantled 5 men in 83 seconds, because your father refused to let it die. His chest felt hollow, empty but burning. She turned her head, staring at the dusty shelves, seeing not cans and wrappers but the hospital bed, the frail grip, the whispered warning. What happened to the women? She asked, her voice tight. Dawson's expression darkened. We don't know, they were transferred. No records after that, but if I had to guess, he trailed off, his silence louder than words. Steadied her breathing. She wanted to rage, to demand answers, to drag out of his office and force the truth from his throat. But years of training whispered restraint. Instead, she asked, why now, why tell me? Because history is repeating itself, Dawson said, his tone sharpened. That spectacle yesterday, that wasn't about testing you, it was about eliminating you. The daughter of Thomas Vance using techniques buried. You're a threat to his whole narrative. And Montgomery's video, he shook his head. That video's a wildfire. It's already beyond his control. Thought of the faces in the chow hall. Respect, resentment, fear. Change burning through the base like electricity. Dawson leaned forward, his voice low. Your father knew this day would come. Before he died, he gave me something. Told me to hold it until you were ready, until you needed it. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a worn manila envelope. He slid it across the counter. Hesitated. Her hands trembled not from fear but from the weight of inheritance. She opened it slowly. Inside was a small leather notebook, pages filled with her father's tight handwriting. Photographs, grainy, sun-bleached, showing Thomas Vance in desert fatigues standing beside men she recognized only from records, among them, younger but unmistakable. And finally, a cassette tape, its plastic cracked with age. Her breath caught. What is this? Your father's journal, Dawson said quietly. Notes he made during the operation. The photographs prove we were there despite the official records. And the tape, his voice dropped lower. The tape is a recording of the meeting where ordered the cover-up. Your father carried a recorder in his pocket. Insurance. His hands shook as she held the cassette. She could almost hear her father's voice bleeding through the plastic, preserved in magnetic lines for 30 years. Why didn't he use it? She asked. Dawson's face was solemn. By the time he realized what they were doing, his career was finished, and had power, connections. Your father decided exposing it then would destroy more than it saved, so he waited, trusted that someday someone would carry it forward. Closed her eyes, pressing the tape to her palm as though it were her father's hand. A lump rose in her throat, sharp, unyielding. And now, she asked softly. Now it's up to you. Dawson leaned back, his shoulders slumping with 30 years of regret. You can use it, expose them, or hold it. Use it as leverage, but make no mistake, already knows you're dangerous. Too, they won't stop. Silence fell, heavy, broken only by the lantern's hiss. Slipped the items back into the envelope, her jaw tightening. She wasn't ready to decide, not yet. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her father's warning wasn't delirium, it was truth. She stood, sliding the envelope into her jacket. Her voice, when it came, was calm, cold. Then we fight in the shadows. Dawson gave a weary nod. Your father would be proud. Left the gas station without looking back. The night air hit her like a wave, cool, carrying the scent of pine and asphalt. The stars above were sharp, distant, uncaring. As she walked toward her jeep, her hand brushed the outline of the envelope in her pocket. It felt like weight and wings all at once. The battlefield had shifted. This wasn't about one fight in a conference room. It was about history, about truth, about survival. And Vance was ready. Why did the base feel different now? Had walked these corridors for months, the same worn concrete floors, the same fluorescent lights humming like static overhead. But after 83 seconds, after one fight that should never have happened, nothing felt the same. Whispers followed her everywhere. Salutes came sharper from some, slower from others. Soldiers who once ignored her now studied her like she was a riddle too dangerous to solve. And she carried the envelope, always near her, pressed beneath her jacket, never left behind. Her father's handwriting, his photographs, the cassette tape that could burn down careers. She hadn't listened to it yet. She wasn't ready. The weight of it was enough. Montgomery caught up with her outside the motor pool, her stride quick, phone already buzzing in her hand. You've seen the numbers, right? She asked without preamble. Shook her head. I don't track views. Well, maybe you should. Sarah's voice was a mix of disbelief and awe. That video, it's past 1 million. 1 million. I've got reporters emailing me, DM requests from every outlet you can imagine. CNN, Fox, even some guy claiming to be from Netflix. They're calling it the 83 seconds that changed Fort. His jaw tightened. It wasn't supposed to be a show. I know, Sarah said, her voice softening. But it is, and now you're a symbol. She tucked her phone away, her eyes narrowing. Hates symbols. Didn't answer, she didn't need to. The thought of made her stomach knot, not out of fear but anticipation. He would move soon, she could feel it. The first move came from an unexpected place. The massive man waited outside the gym, his face still marked with bruises from the table's splinters. His posture was stiff, but not hostile. He straightened when she approached, as though gathering courage. "Sergeant Vance," he said, his voice lower than she'd ever heard it. "Got a minute?" Stopped, her hand brushing the envelope under her jacket out of reflex. "Depends." He hesitated, then exhaled. "Look, I was an ass. Thought this whole thing was a joke, but what you did," he shook his head. "I've never seen anything like it, and I don't mean just the fighting. You didn't gloat, you didn't rub it in, you just did it, like it was nothing." Studied him, waiting for the catch. Shifted uncomfortably. "I want to learn what you know, how you move, how you take people down like that." His jaw tightened. "I don't care what thinks. I've been in enough firefights to know strength doesn't mean a damn thing if you can't finish." His chest tightened, not with pride, not yet, but with something unfamiliar. An opening. "Why?" she asked quietly. He hesitated again, then said, "Because I don't want to lose another man under my watch. If what you know keeps my guys alive, I'll swallow every ounce of pride I've got." For a long moment just watched him. The arrogance was gone. What remained was a soldier. Broken, humbled, but still a soldier. "Tomorrow," she said finally. 0600, no excuses." Nodded sharply. Relief flickered across his face. By the next morning it wasn't just. Showed up, his pride still raw but curiosity stronger. Bell limped in, his knee wrapped but his eyes sharp with determination. Even head still foggy, dragged himself in. And Dawson, bruised and quiet, stood at the back, watching but not yet stepping forward. Faced them in the dim light of the gym. She felt the weight of her father's notebook in her pocket, his voice echoing in her mind. "Combat isn't size, it's inevitability." "Forget everything you think you know," she said, her voice carrying. "Forget strength, forget speed. This isn't about looking powerful, it's about balance, precision, time. You don't beat someone bigger by being stronger. You beat them by making them collapse under their own weight." Frowned. "Sounds like philosophy." Lips almost curved. "It is, but it's also survival." She demonstrated. Movements stripped to their essentials. A shift of balance, a sweep of the ankle, a palm strike that turned a man's lungs into traitors. The techniques felt older than her bones, passed from her grandfather's hands to her own, refined in desert sand, now living here in this sterile gym. At first they stumbled, swung too hard, lunged too fast, but corrected them, patient, steady. Her voice never rose, but her presence filled the room, and slowly they began to understand. Their bulk became liability, their power betrayed them, and small and precise made it all visible. By the end of the session, sweat poured down their faces. Bell's shirt clung to him. His breath came ragged, but none of them sneered anymore. They listened. They learned. And word spread again. Not whispers this time. Stories. 5 men training under the woman they had once mocked. Vance turning enemies into students. Noticed. He stormed into her office 3 days later, his voice a blade. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Didn't flinch. She sat behind her desk, the envelope hidden beneath a stack of files, her rifle leaning against the wall. "Training soldiers," she said evenly. "You're undermining the chain of command," snapped. "These men report to me, not you. You don't get to rewrite doctrine on a whim." Rose slowly, her eyes locking with his. "With respect, sir, doctrine didn't save Michaels in Kandahar. Doctrine didn't pull Anderson out of that alley in Kabul. Technique did. Balance did. And if that threatens you, maybe it's not the technique that's the problem." His face reddened, his hand clenching into a fist at his side. For a heartbeat, thought he might actually strike her. But then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening. "This isn't over," he hissed, "not by a long shot." He turned and stalked out, his boots echoing like gunfire in the hallway. Stood in the silence that followed, her pulse steady. She didn't know what's next move would be, but she knew one thing: the wildfire was no longer hers to control. It had spread. To Bell, to soldiers who were watching, whispering, questioning. Later that night, she sat in her quarters with Sarah, the envelope open between them. The photographs spread across the bed, the notebook filled with her father's handwriting, the cassette tape lying between them like a relic. "Have you listened?" Sarah asked softly. Shook her head, "Not yet." "Why not?" Traced her finger over the tape, the plastic cracked, the reels inside frozen in time. "Because once I do, there's no going back." Sarah leaned closer. "Maybe that's the point." Didn't answer. Not yet. But in her chest the decision was building, steady and unstoppable. The battlefield was changing again, and somewhere deep inside her knew 83 seconds was only the beginning. Why was she afraid of pressing play? Vance had kicked down doors in Kandahar, crawled through alleys slick with blood in Mosul, held her breath in sniper nests while mortars shook the earth beneath her. Fear was familiar, manageable, but this, the little rectangle of cracked plastic lying on her nightstand, felt heavier than combat, because once she heard it, there would be no unknowing. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor of quarters, her laptop open, wires and converters sprawled like veins across the rug. The cassette player she dug up from supply sat ready, its lid open like a mouth waiting to breathe. "You ready?" Sarah asked quietly. Sat on the edge of her bed, the envelope in her lap, her father's notebook open beside her. Pages of handwriting she could almost hear in his voice. Steady, patient, always teaching. "No," said finally, "but I'll never be." She slid the tape into the player. The lid snapped shut with a finality that made her chest tighten. Sarah pressed play. For a moment there was only static, then voices, male, firm, crisp with authority. "Operation Clean Sweep will remain compartmentalized. No official record, no trace." The voice was unmistakable, younger, but the arrogance unchanged. Another voice followed, older, deeper, and the women. "Detained, transferred to Saudi custody under Allied coordination. As far as the record is concerned, they never existed." His throat went dry. Then another voice, quieter, measured, her father. "Sir, with respect, these women aren't an enemy. They're a resource. Their techniques, what they've been taught, this could change everything. We can't bury it." "You're out of line," Captain Vance snapped. "No, I'm not." Her father's voice sharpened, years of integrity distilled into steel. "You saw what they could do. One of them disarmed in under 3 seconds. Another had on the ground before he could blink. These aren't anomalies. They're proof that combat isn't about brute strength. It's about precision, balance, if we integrate this." The older voice cut him off. "General, enough. This discussion is closed. Those women do not exist. And if you want to keep your career, neither does this conversation." Silence followed. Not empty, suffocating. Could almost see her father's face, the way his jaw would have set, the way his eyes would have burned even as his future collapsed in that room. Then softer, almost whispered into the recorder, "If this is buried, it will not stay buried. Someday, someone will carry it forward." Her father's last words on the tape. Pressed her hand against her mouth, fighting the sting in her eyes. For years she'd wondered if his warning was fever dream nonsense, morphine twisting a soldier's regrets. But here it was. His voice, recorded in the moment of truth, promising that the burden would fall to someone. Sarah leaned back, exhaling shakily. "Jesus Christ, do you realize what this means?" Closed her eyes, letting the words sink like shrapnel. "It means he was right. It means has been covering this up for 30 years. And it means if this gets out." Sarah finished for her. "It'll blow a hole in the Pentagon big enough to drive a tank through." Opened her eyes. "That's not the question." Then what is? The question is, do I want that hole, or do I use this another way? The room fell into silence, broken only by the faint whir of the tape spinning to its end. Stared at the notebook, her father's handwriting, notes about techniques, about names, about coordinates long erased from official records. He had carried the truth even when it cost him everything. Could she do less? The knock on her door came like a gunshot. Both women froze, slid the tape back into the envelope, snapping it shut, while Sarah killed the player, rose, her hand hovering nearly at her side. Another knock, firmer. Sergeant Vance, open up. Yes. Sarah's eyes widened. How the hell? Raised a hand, signaling silence. She opened the door just enough to see his face, sharp in the fluorescent hallway light. Sir, she said evenly. Inside, he ordered, brushing past her without waiting. His eyes swept the room, bed, desk, shelves. Sarah sat stiff on the rug, laptop closed, her expression innocent. Turned back to. His tone was calm, but beneath it ran a current of rage. You think I don't know what you're doing? You think I don't know Dawson's been whispering in your ear? You're playing with fire, Sergeant, and you're going to get burned. Didn't move. Her hand itched toward the envelope, hidden under a folded blanket, but she forced herself still. With respect, sir, she said slowly, I don't answer to whispers, I answer to truth. His eyes narrowed, drilling into hers. Truth doesn't win wars. Order does, remember that. He turned on his heel, storming out, the door slamming behind him. For a long moment, neither woman breathed. Sarah broke the silence first, whispering, he knows. Nodded, then we're already at war. That night she couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because of her father's voice etched into her skull. Someday, someone will carry it forward. She rose at 300, pulling on her boots. The base was quiet, sleeping, but her mind was alive with fire. She walked to the gym, empty in the dead of night, and began to move. Drills her grandfather had drilled into her. Balance, flow, precision. Each strike a memory, each step a vow. She wasn't just carrying it forward, she was becoming it. By sunrise, sweat slicked her shirt, her arms trembling, but her mind was clear. The choice wasn't whether to fight, the choice was how. And in the shadows was already moving his pieces. Why did the air itself feel heavy? Had felt it before firefights in foreign cities, before ambushes where silence meant death. That electric stillness before everything broke. At Fort it came not from gunfire but from whispers, rumors twisting through the barracks, glances traded like smuggled currency. Everyone knew something was happening. Nobody knew what. By then the tape wasn't just a relic in his pocket. It was a storm. She hadn't released it. Not yet. But its existence pressed on her chest like weight and wings, and knew it. His face in the hallway that night, his voice like venom, truth doesn't win wars, order does, still echoed in her ears. And he moved quickly. The first order came down at morning briefing. Was reassigned, effective immediately. No more sniper training, no more operations. Administrative duties buried in an office far from soldiers. Read it with a casual tone, as if announcing a weather update. Sat still at the table, her face neutral, but inside her pulse thrummed. They weren't even pretending anymore. This wasn't discipline. This was exile. When the briefing ended, stopped her in the hallway, his broad frame blocking the exit. His voice was low, urgent. We're not buying it. None of us. You belong out here, not pushing papers. Appeared at his side, jaw clenched. Bell limped up behind them, two eyes still bloodshot but sharp. Even Dawson. They all stood there, bruised, watching her with something she hadn't seen before. Loyalty. Shook her head slightly. This isn't your fight. The hell it isn't, said. You think we're gonna stand by while Barry's the only thing that's kept us alive in training? No, you taught us. You gave us something real. That's worth more than his damn doctrine. His voice cut in, quieter but firmer. Tell us what to do. Looked at them, 5 men who had once mocked her, doubted her, tried to break her, and now stood like a wall at her side. She thought of her father, alone in that room 30 years ago, begging them to see the truth. And she thought of his voice on the tape. Someday, someone will carry it forward. She exhaled. Then we move carefully, quietly. Wants me isolated, we don't let him. Montgomery slipped into the group, phone in hand, her face taut. Too late for quiet. Reporters are outside the gates. They want you, they're smelling blood. Is doing everything he can to keep them out, but the story out of his hands. Swallowed, 1 million views, 2 million. Headlines spinning from her fight, from rumors, from shadows of something deeper. She hadn't said a word publicly, and already the world was circling. That night made his next move. Military police came to her quarters. They searched her room, methodical, eyes cold, hands rough. They rifled through her locker, her desk, her drawers. They found nothing, because the envelope was already gone, tucked into Sarah's hands hours before. But the message was clear. Wasn't waiting for her to slip. He was going to break her. Sarah was waiting in the shadows outside the barracks, the envelope hidden under her jacket. Her eyes burned with quiet fury. They're not even hiding it anymore. No, said softly, they're not. What now? Looked past her to the dark silhouette of the flagpole against the stars. Her father's words beat steady in her skull. Watch the shadows. Not everyone wearing our flag stands for our values. Now, she said, we stop playing defense. The next day, training resumed. Not officially, orders forbade it. But at dawn, in the far corner of the motor pool where few ever wandered, and her 5 stood in a circle. No ranks, no stripes, just soldiers. She pushed them harder than before. Not just technique, discipline. Balance drills until their legs shook. Reflex exercises until their hands ached. She forced them to strip away arrogance, ego, reliance on power. And to their credit, they took it. Every stumble, every fall, every bruise. They absorbed it, learned it, carried it. It wasn't just training, it was defiance, quiet but undeniable. By week's end, others joined. 2 younger soldiers, curious, then 4 more. By the second week, there were a dozen. By the third, nearly 30. Men and women, sweating together in silence, moving through drills that had been meant to vanish in desert sand 30 years ago. Noticed, of course he did. He confronted her outside the chow hall one afternoon, his voice low, venom barely leashed. You think this makes you strong. You think teaching them tricks makes you untouchable. You're building a mutiny, Vance, and mutinies burn. Met his gaze without flinching. So let it burn. Maybe ashes are what we need. For a moment, his hand twitched, as if he wanted to grab her, strike her, anything to break her. But too many eyes were watching. He turned instead, his boots cracking hard against the pavement as he walked away. Sarah slid up beside her, whispering, You just lit the fuse. His jaw tightened. No, did 30 years ago, I'm just holding the match. That night she finally opened the notebook again. She traced her father's words, the notes about techniques, about soldiers, about the cover-up. And in the margins, a line she hadn't noticed before. Faded, almost illegible. If they silence me, they will try to silence you. But strength is not silence. It is what silence hides. Closed her eyes, feeling the truth settle like steel in her bones. She wasn't just fighting anymore. She was fighting history. And history was waking up. How long could silence hold back a storm? Had asked herself that question every day since the tape played her father's voice into the shadows of her quarters. Now, the storm was here. She felt it in the quick glances of soldiers passing in the corridor, in the way MPs lingered too long near her door, in the way his name carried not authority but fear when whispered at chow. By the 4th week, the wildfire was undeniable. 30 soldiers training with her had grown to nearly 60. Different backgrounds, different ranks, men and women both. Some bruised from yesterday's session, some limping from today's, but all returning, because what gave them wasn't rebellion, it was survival. And hated it. He made his play at dawn. Woke to the slam of boots on gravel outside her window. Shouts, orders barked. She pulled on her boots, her mind already racing. By the time she stepped outside, MPs were lined across the yard, rifles slung, faces unreadable. Stood at their center, crisp uniform, eyes blazing. "Sergeant Vance," he called, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "You are relieved of duty, effective immediately. You are ordered to surrender all training activity, all unauthorized instruction, and all materials in your possession. Now." Silence rippled through the watching soldiers. Bell, they stepped closer behind her, forming a wall. Sarah pushed through the crowd, phone in hand, already recording. His heartbeat slowed, each thud like a drum. Wanted her crushed here in front of everyone. A clean removal, but this wasn't about her anymore. This was about every soldier watching. She took a step forward. "You want me gone, sir. Fine, but you don't want to explain why. You don't want to explain the desert, the women, Operation Clean Sweep." The name cut through the air like a blade. Soldiers shifted. A few frowned, confused. Others glanced sharply at. His face twitched, barely, but saw it. "Enough," he snapped. "That operation never existed." Sarah's voice rang out. "Then why is your voice on this tape?" Every head turned as she held up her phone, and from its small speaker, her father's recording poured into the morning air. "Operation Clean Sweep will remain compartmentalized. No official record, no trace." Gasps, murmurs. The crowd thickened, soldiers pushing closer, eyes wide. His throat tightened, but her voice stayed steady. "30 years ago, my father tried to bring the truth forward. You silenced him. You destroyed careers to protect your lie, and now you're trying to do it again. But the difference is this," she gestured to the crowd. "We're not afraid anymore." His face darkened. "You're finished, Vance." "No," she said softly, "you are." The MPs hesitated. They looked then at the soldiers, then back again. Order or truth, doctrine or dignity. And slowly the line fractured. One MP lowered his rifle, another stepped back. The balance shifted, saw it, and for the first time saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. "Arrest her," he barked, but no one moved. Instead stepped forward, towering, voice steady. "With respect, sir, you don't command us anymore." The silence that followed was louder than shouting. His mouth opened, then closed. His face pale, his authority crumbling not from mutiny but from exposure. The wildfire had consumed him. He turned sharply, storming through the crowd. No salute followed him. No voices called after him, just silence. Stood still, her chest heaving. The tape in Sarah's hand, the notebook in her pocket, the truth no longer buried. Broke the silence first. What now? Looked around at the faces, young, old, raw, soldiers who wanted to believe in something more than doctrine. She thought of her father, of his last words. "Strength is not silence. It is what silence hides." She spoke quietly, but her voice carried. "Now we carry it forward, not for me, not for him, for all of us, because dignity doesn't speak, it acts." The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They simply stood taller, a quiet wall of resolve. That night sat alone beneath the flagpole, the envelope open on her lap. She reread her father's notes by flashlight, her fingers tracing each faded line. She didn't know where the fight would lead, whether the Pentagon would bury it deeper, whether shadows would come hunting, whether tomorrow would bring victory or exile. But she knew one thing: the silence was broken. And once broken, silence never mends. She closed the notebook, slid it back into the envelope, and looked up at the night sky. Stars scattered across the darkness, sharp and endless. Her father's voice lingered in her chest, not as memory but as truth. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." And Vance was ready.